always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
He said it on day one.
Let's put God number one, let's put religion number two, and then it's tariff.
And he's said it plenty of times since.
I love tariffs.
Like, really loves them. So much so that the White House gave April the 2nd, 2025, the full Hollywood treatment.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day.
This was Donald Trump's blockbuster, his flagship moment.
This will be indeed the golden age of America.
Trump had perhaps been counting down to today's critical US Supreme Court decision, which did exactly what he feared. It declared that Trump's use of a 1977 law to justify his sweeping tariffs by declaring a national emergency was not okay. Congress had not given him that authority. The president had overstepped the mark. A decision he was clearly anticipating when he visited a steel manufacturing factory in Georgia yesterday that he claimed had been boosted by the policy.
He just said, I'd give you a big hug if the press wasn't out here, because the tariffs have really been a big difference.
It's been a game changer.
So no surprise that today Trump emerged furious but unbowed.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long, that I can assure you. Other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected.
So what happens now?
I think uncertainty is the biggest takeaway from today's Supreme Court decision. I think there's a lack of clarity around what next for the countries who have negotiated trade agreements with the United States. And second is uncertainty for importers and for people in supply chains. It's very unclear how the refund process of as of December 2025, $129 billion in tariffs that were covered by today's decision could potentially be reimbursed.
Businesswoman Rebecca Melsky is already part of a separate lawsuit against the tariffs after they caused major financial damage to the kids' clothing company she started.
We haven't known where to produce our products, like which countries are going to be, catch the ire of the president next has been impossible to determine. And we haven't known how much our products were going to cost when they get to shore, because no one knows 6 months from now what the tariff rate on any individual country is going to be. It's been impossible to plan, hugely expensive, and incredibly stressful.
The decision came from the 9 Supreme Court justices, 3 Liberals and 6 Conservatives, each nominated by Trump or former presidents. No surprise, the court's 3 Liberal judges voted that the tariffs were illegal. But the 6 Conservative judges divided in 2, with Chief Justice John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch voting with the majority and against Trump, despite 2 of them being nominated by the president himself. So this is seen not just as a rebuke of the president, but a weakening of his influence on America's highest court, where natural allies may have just overturned his economic centerpiece. But there are other ways to impose tariffs, and Trump is not one to go quietly. This decision was all about the extent of presidential power, and what it essentially said is that when it comes to tariffs, the president is not king. Congress is king. And despite what Donald Trump has said, in 1977, Congress did not give the president power to impose a policy in the way that he has done it. But as I said, Donald Trump is not one to go quietly. He has only just stopped speaking about how angry he is about this, how disappointed, and vowed that he is going to find these alternative ways to impose tariffs. He even said, as you mentioned, that there would be an additional 10% global tariff, but also that he will find other ways to go further and harder. Now, It's not clear yet what those ways might be, but one of them, for example, does allow tariffs for 150 days. At the end of that, it still requires a majority from Congress. Now, the Republicans have that, but some Republicans have supported this decision today. And as you can see, Donald Trump is not happy, and his administration has warned this could be a difficult decision for them.
And it's Kristana in Washington. Well, earlier I spoke to Kellyanne Shaw, who advised Donald Trump on trade in his first administration in her role as Deputy Assistant for International Economic Affairs. And I started by putting to her that this is the Constitution biting back at Donald Trump.
Well, I think what the Supreme Court said is that, look, Article 1, Section 8, the authority to lay and impose duties, that is Congress's. And in all instances where they have delegated that to the president, they have done so clearly and with certain guardrails. And in the case of IEEPA, the word tariff didn't appear. The court was not willing to read into regulate imports the way the government had argued it. And so in their view, this wasn't one such delegation. So I don't know if it was the Supreme Court pushing back on the president's tariffs per se. I think it was more about defending the authorities of one branch of government versus the other.
Yes, but that's crucial, because this is a president who is arguing he has absolute authority, and this is the Supreme Court saying, no, you don't.
Well, it was the president saying that under IEEPA, he had the authority to impose tariffs. And the court disagreed with that reading of the statute. Now, the court has suggested, including in today's Supreme Court decision and in the CIT decision, that the president has other tariff authority. So again, this isn't the court saying, we don't like your tariffs, you shouldn't impose tariffs, Mr. President. This is saying, if you are going to impose tariffs, you need other authority to do so, or you need new authority from Congress.
You need to do it the right way. Now, in the meantime, you have about $160 billion, which has been taken from importers and ultimately consumers, that they are going to say, we'd like it back. I mean, isn't there, the Supreme Court didn't order that, but isn't there a sort of a moral duty now on the part of the government to give that money back?
What is interesting about the decision is it doesn't get into that. It doesn't sort of opine on the refund process, whether the government needs to give back the money. It is possible that this question will be answered through subsequent litigation, or it is possible that the president and his administration will address it up front and say, here's our plan. So we don't quite know what's going to happen with the refund process.
So the court haven't made a ruling, but isn't there a sort of a natural justice here, which the president is now up against, which is that he's taken a load of money that he wasn't entitled to. He ought to give it back.
Well, I don't think that the administration is obligated to follow natural justice. This is about following the law and what the laws say and what the court says. And that issue of refunds was not before the Court of International Trade that got appealed to the Supreme Court. That was not an issue that the plaintiffs actually brought. They didn't ask for their money back. They asked for an injunction to stop collecting future tariffs. So that's why this may actually need to go through new litigation to answer the question of refunds, or the administration may just say, look, we're going to answer this for everybody, and here's our refund plan.
Maybe it's not a political statement by the court, but the impact is political, isn't it?
Well, the impact is both political and commercial. I mean, you have every company who is importing into the United States is today asking a question of, am I still paying duties? What about the duties I previously paid? What will the future duties be? This is incredibly disruptive from a commercial perspective until we get some certainty as to the plan forward and what's going to happen on the question of refunds.
Well, joining me now is the former US Solicitor General Neil Katyal. He represented the small businesses who argued that Trump's second-term tariffs were illegal. Thank you for joining us. I feel I have to give you a right to reply first to what Donald Trump has just been saying, because he's been accusing your side of being influenced by foreign interests, of being sleazebags and unpatriotic.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond to any of that. Lord knows how I even could. I mean, I'm focused on what the decision today said, which is President Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional. They are illegal, full stop. The Supreme Court gave us everything we asked for, everything. And that includes two of those justices nominated by Donald Trump himself. And what the court said today is this isn't about any one president. It's about the presidency. It's about the separation of powers, our most fundamental principles that Americans hold dear. And, I'll just leave it at that. He can obviously say whatever he wants, but I think the decision speaks for itself. And I was very proud to have orally argued the case in the United States Supreme Court on November 5th.
He claims he can just replace the IEEPA tariffs with other tariffs. He says he's already announced one of them. I mean, what has been achieved?
Yeah, so I can't really understand what he's saying, because on the one hand, he's saying it's disaster for the country and so on. On the other, he's saying he's going to have even more tariffs. None of this is coherent to me. I don't really understand what he's saying. But what I know the Supreme Court is saying is that the tariffs that President Trump have imposed are now illegal and void. We've always said presidents have some modest tariff authority under the statutes of the United States, but to go further than that is obviously where the court drew the line. And I suspect if he tries it again, they'll draw the line again.
Are you going to fight to get refunds now for the 160 billion that he's already charged illegally?
Yeah, I do think that these refunds should flow, as you were saying, as a matter of course, as a matter of natural justice. If you pocket all this money illegally, I think you called it loads of money, something like that, you've got to give it back. And indeed, the Justice Department itself, in this case, agreed that if they lost, they would give the money back. So I think that there's there'll be some proceedings down in the lower courts, but I think these refund actions will ultimately take place and will be successful, because collecting money when Congress hasn't authorized it is not the American way.
And I guess we'll be back in court over these new tariffs. I mean, the one he's announced is under Section 122, which is about balance of payments. Now, there are some countries that run a trade surplus or a balanced trade with the US. So how can you have a blanket global tariff, under that justification?
Yeah, no, that's obviously something that will be litigated. And just to be clear, we were not fighting a lawsuit that said you can never tariff. We were just making the simple point that in America, Congress is the one that sets the rules for tariffs, not the president. And so if there are other authorities the president can use for more modest tariffs, of course, that's absolutely fine. That's the American way. But to go and do what the president here did, which is to say, I alone can set tariff policy, and not at 10%, like the new tariffs he's claiming to announce today, but even up to 145%, which is his old tariffs, there's no authority for that in the Constitution. There's no authority for that in the laws of the United States. So that's the fundamental problem. That's what the Supreme Court resoundingly said today, accepting every single one of our arguments.
Just finally, I mean, is this constitutional checks and balances reasserting themselves and fighting back?
It is, absolutely. And I'm so proud, as the children of immigrants, to be reminding America, have a part to play in reminding America of what these constitutional values are. I think Justice Gorsuch's concurrence, just the last paragraph, if your viewers are to just look at anything, look at the last paragraph, because it's really an explanation of what the American constitutional system is all about. And, I think what the court did today is send a very strong message that the Constitution in America still reigns supreme.
Mr. Catchell, I'm grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.